Hello ladies and germs, here's some overhead views of the TRI-craft concept. This one is the turbofan, which is the initial stage. It carries the hyper and the rocket to their operational energy states, altitude and velocity. And I kind of chose a turbofan as the initial stage because it's the subsonic. Subsonic flight is not quite as specialized as supersonic flight, so it allows for more utility. And like one of the things that the subsonic phase does is, I forgot to draw the mail slot inlet at the top, but the 2 or 3 turbofan engines are kind of embedded in the rear of the fuselage. But what it does, it of course provides good efficient thrust to the desired altitude throughout the its operational phase. Plus, it has heat exchangers that allow the atmosphere to help cool the compressed air, and which, for one thing, helps the engines operate with more power and efficiency. And for another thing, it also helps procure oxygen for the other 2 stages. One of which here is the ramjet phase, hopefully scramjet. And I think it would probably be more similar in length to the and size to the turbofan stage, which would, it's like the smaller in scale that the turbofan is, the less it has to lift of itself. But anyway, this one gets released at 35 to 40,000 feet, and I'm hoping that its combination of streamlined and aerodynamic cleanness and the weight brought on by the weight of like the rocket and the oxidizer that takes up in its own reservoir will help it to accelerate in a dive past Mach 1. I know there's a lot of controversy as to whether accelerating through supersonic flight is possible in a non-propelled object, but it would be good if it did, because it could go past the highest drag portion of the of Mach 1, say Mach 1.4, without burning a drop of fuel. After which point it can pull out and hopefully maintain that higher speed as it pulls out. It may require some thrust with help from gas generators to keep it from going below that speed when it pulls out and levels, and then finally knocked down or whatever that is to really pours on the coals when it's pointed up. So and that's one of the ideas behind having it dipsy doodle down to 10,000 feet, is it gets the benefit of the much denser atmosphere. It can get much more, it gets a lot more oxygen into a system, and gets it up to the altitudes that and heights that they want. I kind of figure it'll take a number of dipsy doodle type maneuvers, the roller coaster, which would not be perpetual motion, I believe. It's kind of, I think it's working, because dipsy doodle maneuvers have been known to work, which might, if it can, it would be good, because it'll protect it from overly prolonged exposure to high speed atmosphere. And I realize that rudders there are kind of that hyper. Okay, and here's kind of another probably functions best as a lifting body, and what I'm thinking of is that in relatively low speed, maybe the rudders can double its wings. It can be like a hinge geometry, but help it perform at relatively lower speeds for like landing and stuff. And here is stage 3, the rocket, which is actually poised on top of the hyper of the stage 2, which takes the rocket to sufficiently high speed and altitude via its ramjets and some supplemental oxygen assistance to where the rocket can, from that point, take its payload, whether it be, maybe satellite deployment or maybe a manned crew. And of course, a lot of that will be size dependent, and there would have to be packages of various sizes to allow for that if they wanted to do both. But basically, we'll have enough of a boost for the remainder to take it into orbital flight. But anyway, I think that should help there. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, here's kind of another knockdown or whatever that is. I've
shown you what they look like from on top, and I'll show you what this essentially here is the tri-craft in repose, before essentially ready to take off. There's the rocket stage, or wiener of the hot dog, is essentially hidden between the turbofan stage, which is the taking off phase above, and the ramjet phase below it. And you can see the undercarriage. It's a little bit like the undercarriage of what I think was called the Whit Knight, the one that lifted the Spaceship One to its suborbital trajectory. And one of the things I'm planning is for one of my ideas is that the hypersonic phase itself can have like a dolly under it that kind of helps it to support the combined weight. And this dolly can be jettisoned during takeoff, and I'm hoping it can be something like the way the measurement 163 Comet rocket plane in World War II was jettisoned, like just after takeoff, and they were expressing some concerns about a bounce. When it bounces, sometimes it comes up and collides with like the plane, but I'm hoping that maybe a drogue chute can pull it clear from the plane before that type of a thing happens. But anyway, that's the package taking off, and here's what either fuselage pretty much looks like from above. And this here shows the separation phase, where the hyper separates from the turbofan. The hyper separates from the sub, because the turbofan is subsonic, and essentially it does its dive that I mentioned elsewhere. It was the separation phase, where the hyper separates from the turbofan. The hyper separates from the sub, because the turbofan is subsonic, and essentially it does its dive that I mentioned elsewhere in this session, and eventually gets to the point where with like combination of ramjets, maybe hopefully scramjets, and some rocket hybrid propulsion, it gets to a point where it can
this phase where it launches the rocket phase, which I don't know, I'm trying to figure out like a scale between it and the, because you know I want each stage to be lighter than the one that launched it, but I also want them to be sufficient that they don't have to have a heck of a lot of power just to lift themselves. But what it's basically, I'm kind of thinking of it as a form of plane or bomber. You know, you can think of the stage one as like a bomber, and you can think of the hyper. You know, you can think of it, or like I say, you can think of porpoises out of the atmosphere, and it's the equivalent of a hypersonic. It's basically a hypersonic aircraft launching a missile from above, which I'm not sure what aerodynamic problems might result from that, because I know that lifting surfaces do not like having stuff on top of them, so there might be a problem with that. But anyway, it gets the missile, it gets the rocket to a point where it can do the balance into orbit. And basically anything helps.
All that's left is the bones.